Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Chief Digital Officer for DATAVERSITY. We want to thank you for joining the final webinar in the monthly series, Data Architecture Strategies with Donna Burbank. Today, Donna will discuss the business value of data modeling. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we will be collecting them via the Q&A panel. And if you'd like to chat with us or with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And just to note, the chat defaults to send to just the panelists. We may absolutely change that to network with everyone. To open the chat and the Q&A panels, you will find those icons in the bottom middle of your screen or at the top toolbar for those features. And as always, we will send a follow-up email within 2 business days containing links to the slides, the recording of this session, and any additional information requested throughout the webinar. And as always, including Donna's information, so you can always keep in touch. And as today is the final webinar in the series, before we get started, I'd like to introduce you, please, to Tony Shaw, founder and CEO, to help express how grateful we are at DATAVERSITY for Donna's time and talent. Tony, hello and welcome.
Thanks, Shannon. And hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I sit in on many of these sessions, but I guess today I have the honor of a little higher profile because I really want to thank my friend and colleague, Donna Burbank, for 10 years of conducting these sessions on behalf of DATAVERSITY. It's been a wonderful partnership. It is certainly not the beginning or the end of our relationship. We actually started working with Donna probably 10 years or more before we started the webinar series, and we will continue to work with her and global data strategy on future events, both digital and in person. In fact, if you want to catch up with Donna, she'll be at the conference, DGIQ and EDW conference in May in San Diego. So, yeah, it's been a wonderful partnership. It's very fitting, in fact, that the topic today is the business benefits of data modeling, because for the first many years of knowing Donna, she was very much focused on data modeling. That was how I think she probably got her start in the data modeling, in the data management business, and certainly that's how we started our relationship with her. So we've come full circle with today's topic. But Donna, thank you on behalf of Shannon, myself, all of us here at DATAVERSITY for everything that you've brought to us and our audience over the last 10 years. It's been a real honor and pleasure. So thank you.
And I'll do a first of the 10 years and go on camera, which I don't think we have ever done on these, but given that you were. And I just want to, and I'll let pass it over to Shannon in a minute, but I will just echo what you said. It's been a very strong partnership, and I think it might even, I don't want to say this out loud, it's probably been even more than 20 years we've been working together, and I don't think this is the end. This is just the end of this particular phase, and I do want to thank everyone we've got some faithful joiners, or I think I've done every webinar for the past 10 years, so we appreciate that, and everyone's dedication to DATAVERSITY, and you've been a great partner. So thank you so much, Tony and Shannon.
Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure. So I'll leave you with your fans. Thank you very much again. Talk to you later.
I think so. Now I'm going off camera. And Shannon, you're on mute.
Oh, and Donna, I'm just going to join the party here, and let me echo those sentiments. Yeah, but now let me. It's yeah, I love our work together. All right, but let's get the party started here. I know everybody's excited
home week, right?
Yeah, to hear the presentation. It's a great topic too to end on. So let me just go and make introductions. In case you don't know Donna already, let me introduce you to her. Donna is a recognized industry expert in information management with over 20 years of experience helping organizations enrich their business opportunities through data and information. She currently is the managing director of Global Data Strategy Limited, where she assists organizations around the globe in driving value from their data. And with that, let me give the floor to Donna to begin her presentation. Donna, hello and welcome.
Hello. Great to be here. Great to wrap this up with, I would have to say, the topic nearest and dearest to my heart. Well, all of these topics are near and dear to my heart, but as Tony mentioned, I've been doing data modeling for a long time. Helped develop some of the tools on the market. Some of you might be using both Irwin and Ear Studio. Used to be my babies in different capacities. But today we're really going to focus on more the business side. And I have been doing data modeling for a long time. I currently, run a consultancy called Global Data Strategy, and we use data models practically every day with great success. And so I know when I'm at some of the DataVersity conferences or I'm speaking on DataVersity in person, people will come up and say, really, I struggle. Well, talk to me if you're struggling, because I very rarely use absolutes like always and never and things like that. But I generally always have with the right techniques, success using a data model to communicate data concepts with the business. And I'll give you some of the tips of the trade in this. And then I'll also talk about, some of the business value of data modeling is on the technical side, efficiency. And, I won't talk specifically about AI on this call because everybody does, but how do you really leverage your data assets in any capacity without the right labels, the right definitions, right? So it's really foundational to everything we do within data. So got to start with some data modeling cartoons if you have them. And maybe it's not that funny, but if you've been through it, and I remember I would be at some of the DataVersity conferences early in my career, and someone would inevitably bring up that comment in a presentation, like, yeah, trying to get a single view of customer, right, and or single definition of customer, and everyone would laugh. And I know, when I was 20, I was like, how I don't get it. How hard is that? What's a customer? Well, I think a lot of you on the call have been doing this and insert any core data entity here, product, location. Gosh, I could tell a story, and I won't. Don't worry, I won't go on my long Donna rants. But any data term or data concept that's core to the business is most likely fraught with a lot of different definitions because a lot of different people are using it, right? The more eyes on it, the more, different points of view are going to have. So, um, I, I I don't hear this as much as I used to, although I know it still happens. People write to me and say, how do I confront the groups that are like, well, come on, let's just skip the modeling. We don't have time for that. Let's just run through and get the development done. That's going to be faster. And then I hear my mom's voice in my head. You might have heard this phrase: if you don't have time to do it right, do you have time to do it again? And time and time again, and I'll give you some, examples in some of the case studies later in this presentation, huge errors over something as simple as what's the definition of a term? What data element? I had 3 meetings this morning on just these types of questions. What are the core data elements for master data? Or what's the data type for this? And inevitably it's, well, let's bring up the data model and double check. So yes, there's upfront work with the data model, but it absolutely pays itself off down the road because you have both the semantic meaning and the right technical data structures in a nice visual way to look at things. So don't skip the definition of what's a customer or what's a product or what's a location because it's going to come back to haunt you later if you don't. So I want to be clear on this. When we're talking about data models and the different levels of them, all have value, but where I kind of mentioned at the beginning, folks will come up to me and say, I really kind of fell flat when I talked to the business. And then there, I say, I've never not have success. I have eventual success. I've made some mistakes along the way. And because I get excited about data models, I might show a business person a logical or heaven forbid, even a physical model. I might not have the best same reaction as showing them a conceptual or maybe an enterprise model. So what do I mean here? At the pure business view, you're either at the enterprise where you have sort of high level subject areas, or more often at that conceptual level. We'll show some examples if this is new to you. The core semantics, what is a customer? What is a product? All of these types of things at a very simple term. In the point, and why I put the purpose on the right, because mixing the purpose can where we get things confused. Is purpose is communication. And I am very pure when I need to be on my data modeling techniques and trying when I'm building a database, et cetera. But I tend to be a little looser in data modeling notation or presentation when I'm talking to the business because the goal of a conceptual model is communication. So will I put it in a PowerPoint? Will I sometimes use pictures? Yes, because I'm trying to get to the point of what is a customer or what is a product, right? And if that's the best way to get to that, then yes, I often do put things like relationship with cardinality if that's the best way to express it. But you're trying to get to the communication. So I think understanding the purpose of each of these layers can be really helpful if you're not getting the buy-in at the right level. Now, logical data models, you might say, well, isn't that a business focused model? And that, yes, you're just getting down to the next level of detail. You're going to have more entities, you're going to have more concrete business rules. Maybe that's your business analyst. Whereas maybe at the conceptual level, it could be anyone you grab from marketing. And so, how do you define a customer, right? So, I have had good experience with just regular old business people at the conceptual level, also at the logical level. And I would say too, as I'm sharing all my tips of the trade. And I know, almost everybody on our consulting team does data models at some point when we're trying to explain things. And I've found over time, don't be afraid to add level of detail where it's business level of detail. I think sometimes we can take it too far, and I hate the phrase dumb it down. Right. We can dumb down or whatever you want to say, simplify the data modeling terminology, but not the business terminology. Because at the end of the day, this is the people's business, right? So when you explain it in the right way, I've had I don't know, teachers and marketing folks and finance folks really get into seemingly, and I'll show some examples later, really detailed data modeling conversations. They may not know that's what they mean. Does a customer have more than one address, or is that an optional relationship when, et cetera, et cetera? What's the hierarchy? And I think as more of data things become in the lexicon of the business, or maybe they are, I'll have business people saying, well, isn't this a hierarchy and things like that. They get those core concepts because that's what they use every day in their business. Now, at the physical level, I would say generally that's for a database for your data engineers, your DBAs, your developers. That's where you're going to get to the physical tables and columns. When I develop these, and I often, when you're trying to really understand the full context, I generally do top down. So what are we trying to do from a business perspective, and then bottom up? Because generally at this point in the world, there are existing applications, and you can learn from those. Because there are inherent business rules in any database or any application that has a database behind it. We're doing several of these right now at different customers with ERP systems, right? Your SAPs, your PeopleSofts, that's your Oracle, et cetera. Um, and they'll take the implementation from the vendor, and there are business rules there, but it doesn't match their business rules. Something as simple as can a customer have more than one address can really flummox an organization and kind of get folks hung up. So I think all of these are relevant, but just make sure to put them in the proper place and the proper usage. And I probably spent too much time on that slide, but I think it is helpful putting everything in context of where things fit. So, as both Shannon and Tony mentioned, we've been working together for many years, and one of the things we've done over the past, I think, 9 years or so, is to do a trends in data management report. And we've asked this question about data modeling just about each year. Always, always positive to see that the majority of organizations are using data models. I don't have that particular figure here, but it's generally in the high percentages. And what I've found is that generally when we ask specifically what types of models do you use, the business centric ones come in first. So it kind of goes between, depending on the year, conceptual will be first, logical will be second. This year, logical was first, conceptual was second. Because I think folks are realizing as we try to be more data driven and we're doing more business centric design, absolutely critical to have that business level. But physical data models come in not too far behind. So, and then some of these others, I have previous webinars on some of these where we talk about data flow and data lineage and CRUD matrices and things like that. So would like to see those a little bit higher as well. But very pleased to see kind of that high percentage of folks doing logical and conceptual data models. So I'll kind of start with that conceptual layer, and partly because this is a business focus, and got to throw another data modeling cartoon in there. And I'm passionate about a lot of things coming to data, but this is one I am passionate about. In a conceptual model, use the language of the business, right? So because we're one of my clients, and we're gonna make a T-shirt out of it. She always says words mean things, right? And so is the client different than a customer, different than a consumer, different than, right? Probably. That's why we're documenting them. And so getting very clear on those terms and asking those probing questions is kind of the 5 whys, or really delving in. Is the client different than a customer? And you don't. This is a balance too, right? If you get the right question in the right context, you really get the engagement of the business. They'll say, exactly, we have this argument that no, clients are only our human customers, and the customer is actually the enterprise or the firm. Thank you for asking. We always get confused with that. If you get too academic and start, what is a chair? Let's philosophically describe, and then they don't want you in the room. And what's hard, you'll know when you have that right example from what you've read, what the problems people have had. And I won't go on a Donna rant about that, but I mean, we had one company, it was a marketing firm for restaurants, and we did spend a 2-week sprint on what is a flavor, which seems like very academic. If you're an ice cream shop, they'd be like, gosh, it's chocolate ice cream, just sell it, right? But for these folks, what is a flavor? It really was core to their business, right? So pick the right questions, use the language of your business, and make it really clear. And I kind of joke with this, make it look like a PowerPoint, but really a conceptual. I mean, business people, they're visual, right? And models are visual. People are used to PowerPoint, and a conceptual data model can kind of look like that. So pick the right conversation, make it easy to understand. We put it in PowerPoint all the time. Do I generate a database from PowerPoint? No, but again, the right tool for the right job, right? So think of that. The other point in this that I am passionate about is please don't oversimplify or use technical terms. Like one of my Donna rants is something like the party model, right? Which may work. It may be, we're working with a legal firm and they talk about party in a legal contract, but generally, I don't hear most businesses using the term a party, and often that's used for kind of a generic company, right? That could be a supplier, they could be a customer, they could be a partners, right? But unless the business uses that, you can oversimplify, right? And so I think a supplier and a customer can be very different, and just ask that question, right? And so because if to its logical extreme, you could end up having a data model with just things relate to things. All things have things, and so you should really get specific as it relates to the business terms. Yes, maybe at the physical level you might share tables, but we're not talking about tables, right? And I think where things go wrong sometimes when I see a conceptual model not landing with the business, we oversimplify at the technical level. Don't think about how you're going to implement it at a table level, although they're related. Think of it at the logical level, right? Of is this a different business concept? And I think it'll go over a lot better with folks. So an example of a conceptual data model, in this particular tool I'm using, I like it because or a lot of the tools do this nowadays. You can actually show the definition on the data model. And to me, it's kind of like a glossary on steroids, right? And so, because people can understand it, okay, there's an employee and it says an employee is a full or part-time worker. We're like, wait a minute. We don't consider part-time workers employees. They're interns if they're part-time, right? So just by looking at the definition, you'll probably get some reaction from the business. You don't always put the definitions. I sometimes just like a clean picture of these things and how they relate together. I often get the question of things like, do you really you put subtypes on a conceptual data model, and I do it all the time. That's one of the easiest things for people to understand. Which of these things is not like the other, different types of things, right? Is a sales rep really treated differently than a support rep? Or the support reps in this case supply, they work with customers who's the individuals, but sales reps work with a company, which is an organization that a customer works with. And these seem so basic, but I mean, the number of conversations with real life breathing customers we've had this year where their business problems relate back to, are you talking about the company or the contact within that company, or the address of the contact or the address of the person, right? It's not brain surgery, but clarifying it clearly in a model like this can do wonders, right? And you're really getting to the core of a lot of the issues the organization's having. So it's the simplicity of these that make them powerful. So don't overcomplicate them. The other thing is you may do an enterprise-wide model. Maybe it has 20 entities on it. But if you're really talking about customer, do a submodel, right? Just do 4 or 5 entities that talk about the topic at hand. And we do that all the time. We'll do a presentation. We'll say, here's the 4 problems you're having. You can't uniquely identify a customer. Well, here's the issue you're having. And you do just the submodel entities to talk about that, right? You just kind of get a lot more buy-in with just talking about the focus. The other thing that's a little bold, right, is putting pictures, right? And some of the tools let you import pictures into the entity. I also just do this in a PowerPoint or a Visio or something. And again, sometimes that brings home, here we have a customer. Well, a customer is a human being, right? Or are we selling B2B and the customer is a company? Or even just showing the picture there can be really clear. I mean, the first time I did this, I was working for a very high profile global multi-billion dollar insurance company based out of New York. High stress environment. And they were actually having a lot of issues with their marketing and their customer service and their targeting for their policyholders and things. And I drew a picture of it was their high net worth individuals, and I had a picture of probably your stereotypical high net worth individual, white guy in a suit, based in Connecticut in his office, right, or something like that. And I showed it, and then I had the customer buys a policy and all that with pictures of, and the marketing sponsor kind of stopped and paused. It was like the longest 30 seconds of my life. I said, this didn't go where I should not have shown pictures to such a formal type of company. And she paused. She goes, "That's really interesting. You showed the high net worth individuals, the, stereotypical white guy in a suit in Connecticut, but we actually work with a lot of Silicon Valley startups, and he probably looks more like the guy in this picture on the right. Like we're actually probably in a t-shirt and sneakers, and that's really who we're targeting." And it actually turned into a whole conversation about, we had everything linked to physical mail. I'm like, no, that person probably wants a text message, and how we market to people is very different. They want things mobile, and so something as simple as a picture on a data model turned into a really deep business conversation of who their target customer is, and what different types of data they need to add to the data model, like text message, like because they only had physical mail at that point. And it was really fascinating that I kind of went out on a limb, but it made it more personal. And I do try to, if they're selling to, men under 30, I try to put a picture of, their typical customer. They're selling to kids, you put a picture of a kid, right? I think I used to do it myself just to try to understand the company. Okay, what are we selling? The product is a toy, or the product is an insurance product. They're very different things. So I would say, with the right audience, either do it for yourself to make sure you understand. It can also be a really good way to tell the story. Because really a data model is a story. And I'll talk more about how they can kind of read like sentences when you're doing it right. And I know a lot of us probably went into tech, so we didn't have to do this sort of thing, but I think data management is kind of the, dare I say, the liberal arts of technology, right? Where we can be technical, but also being, especially at that business level, more personable. And yes, another cartoon about data modeling, but it is just human. I heard something on the radio that someone said, we are such storytellers. Think how we kind of evolved as humans, telling our ancestors stories by the fire, in the evening with our tribe or whatever. And someone said, you can't even sleep without telling ourselves stories, and that's called a dream. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. That is true. Why do we do that? We're just asleep and we tell these stories in our head. We're storytelling creatures, right? So when you're reading the model back to someone, I would say present the model. Talk about it. Okay, we have customers, and we think that's related to a sales rep. You always have one sales rep to a customer, right? And you could, and sometimes we do after we've read through the model, have them read the model and go through all the one-to-many relationships. A customer has one or more or null values of a support rep. Yeah, you can read it that way, but if you tell it via a story, because you can sound really repetitive when you read a data model. Does it have one? Must it have one? How many does it have, right? And you sound kind of nerdy, for lack of a better word. But once you start to tell it as a story and pick out those right things, we're trying to understand, are software products the same way your physical products are? That's a subtype relationship, but you don't lead with that, right? So the more you understand the business and tell the data model in the context of the business, then you're going to have success, and people will like these things called a data model. So, in case you don't believe me, here's real world quotes from real world companies that we worked with. I like this one. I mean, again, all of the different types of, it does not matter industry. I will say that I've had success over any kind of industry liking data models. This is from an early childhood education. They said, "This is really elegant. You summed up our organization in a single page with the conceptual data." I hear that all the time. When you do it right, you're going to sound really smart. Not, well, I'm sure you guys all are smart, but it's the data modeling technique where you learn the business and you repeat the business back to people, and you'll get a lot of good success. This one is my favorite one because I did feel really smart, but it's not because I'm particularly smart. Is I just did data modeling. We were working with a utility company. I have to say, I was not an expert in utilities. We were there for 2 weeks. I interviewed folks. We had the enterprise model, and I can't do it anymore. But at the time, I was talking about how the pipes go to the different residences, and a residence is divided up in different ways, whether it's your pipe or your billing address and all that sort of stuff. And I just was explaining it back to all of the different stakeholders. And someone came up later and said, someone was like, "How long have you worked here?" I said, I guess it was a week. It felt like 2 weeks. Are you sure you didn't work here before? Like we've never had anyone sum up our company so well. Where did you come from? And I said, I didn't do anything magic. I just listened to the interviews and played it back in a format called a data model that explains your business. And they were thrilled. They were trying to do AI, they were trying to do machine learning, all of these great things, but they couldn't because they didn't have the core business rules of their own organization. And nobody in the organization, you may be the smartest person in the organization because nobody in that organization saw everything, right? The people doing utility maintenance didn't know the billing. The billing people didn't know utilities. And those were very two views of something as similar as like a household. So you can seem very wise by showing the data model because it is that holistic view that not everybody has. On that view, on that topic, this was one from software development. We did, I think this was a customer journey. And they said, I've never really thought of the data from that customer perspective. And before, this was really going to help me in the software development because it wasn't just the technical data model, it was getting that business concept. This one is a bit of advice as you go through and do these data models, because I do hear this, unfortunately, too often. I love this data model. The last architect told me I couldn't possibly understand this stuff. Please don't do that. But when presented this way, it makes so much sense. It's so logical. And this actually was an analytics lead, ironically. So this person actually was technical. They just weren't data engineering technical. They were analytics technical, right? And I think we sometimes do that. We're so smart because we know this one thing. You're smart if you understand the business and explain the business back to them, right? And that's where what I said earlier, don't be afraid to get not technical, like talking about, although I'm sometimes guilty of this, cardinality and nullability and things like that, that you don't have to say that to the business, but you should get very technical as it relates to the business and the business rules, because that's where it's going to make sense for people. And you don't have to say null, just say, do you always need to have an email or could that be optional, right? Say it in English, right? And you will get the engagement from the business, but don't talk down to them. And in some sense, you should feel like a beginner every time, because unless you've been working with that business for years and years and years, you probably haven't because you've been doing data, right? Hey, if you're working for the company a long time, but you should come with that naive questioning. I think that's the best way to go to the data model, and you'll really look more smart. You'll see this as well. You can start with an enterprise wide. You may just be doing one department by department. But we did, in this case, did one for a department. I said, great. We have two more people saying, could you do that magic for that you did with that other group? Because it was really, really helpful. I don't really know what these things are, but it was really helpful. This one I love. This explains why our campaigns weren't working. You're the only one that was, we knew the data was bad, but I think that's where a data model comes in. It bridges that technical in the business, where it's business rules in a technical context that should give the data architect and the data engineers and DBAs enough information to have those two things talk well together. This is my favorite one. Hand me the pen. And I'll talk about this later, where I have a lot of success doing kind of whiteboarding sessions. So back in the day when we actually saw each other as human beings, and I still do from time to time, we do this on a literal whiteboard. I've also done them with Miro boards, or I'll show you a picture. Sometimes we just on a PowerPoint kind of draw the entities around. And I just say don't talk too technical to business users, but it isn't all that complicated to show, cardinality. Something that has a one is one. When it has more than one little line, it means no more than one. When it's a zero, it has to be empty. And this is how things relate. 5 minutes, I'm not exaggerating, 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, you explain how this stuff fits together. And I've made this mistake where I would spend 20 minutes in all the data modeling techniques before we showed the model. You don't need it if your model's good, right? You just show a little bit. Hey, this indicator means you can have more than one thing. Do you have more than one thing, or can a customer only have one account, or can a customer have more than one account? Does a customer have to have an account, or can be a customer without a, right? Just say it in English. Pretty soon they'll be. I've had this a lot. Well, hand me the pen. Let me draw this out for you. And that's the beauty of a data model, and that's why not talking down to the business, but talking with the business, and at this conceptual logical level. to be really helpful. Um, so, some quotes from success with the data model. I kind of talked about um, value of whiteboarding. Here's kind of a fictitious whiteboarding we use in some of our sessions. If we don't have a whiteboard, or as I said, there's Miro, there's other, collaboration tools nowadays online where people can and will. And sometimes that's part of it too. We had one client that was just so quiet in meetings, and it was just almost awkward. And we did, I think it was Miro at that point. Usually don't talk about technology, but and everybody started drawing around, and we talked through, and they were putting up different entities and things. And I just think it was the gamification of it, and people didn't feel like they were talking, they were just doing. And we got such buy-in because I think people thought it was fun moving the boxes around, putting lines on it. And we actually got really good feedback. So, and I always generally say you take a start. It can be really hard with just a blank board, right? So you start like, oh, this is probably an insurance company, right? We have agents and policies and products and regions and customers and claims. Are these right? And maybe ask them leading questions. Is a policy separate from the customer? And I know that might seem silly, but if you're insurance, we've worked with several insurance agencies where they had policies they couldn't separate the customers as a separate entity from the policy, right? So all of these things that may seem really simple, um, maybe are not. What's an employee versus an agent? Is an agent just a type of employee? Are they a separate thing? Are they external agents, right? So much of this in these, whatever, how many, there's 6 entities, could be a really detailed business conversation with just these simple words, right? Do you have different types of policies? Is a policy different than an account, right? All this stuff, you will get folks engaged, and don't be afraid. I know all of us don't want to feel dumb. That's just probably the story of my life. But be a little naive. And I've asked questions. I know I'm saying the wrong thing, but on purpose. You know that a policy is different than an account, but you ask it, and you show some vulnerability and let people explain. And you might let other people who were afraid to speak up, right? So there's a bit of an art and a science to running a workshop like this. Um, okay. So one of my favorite topics because I'm a big geek. But I will be vindicated a little bit because anyway, I'll tell you my long story. Sorry. I always joke that I was like the only, I don't know if they even teach it anymore in school, like modeling of sentences. And one of my majors way back was an English major, right? And I was the only third grader in Boston schools that actually enjoyed this, where you kind of would, I forget it now, but you underline the noun. And I remember like a prepositional phrase would be kind of a line down. And really, that's data modeling. And I'm vindicated now with this world of large language models, which is really modeling the English language, right? It is the same thing. There is structure in language, and that's really there's not an LLM. This is just a good old-fashioned entity relationship model, but you need all of these to really understand your business. And this is where I'd say I cheat, but I don't. Say if I'm going into a new client, or you're new to your company, or you're in your company and you're just trying to start a data model, go to a document describing the company, or go to your website. That's how we do it when we go to a new client. Or I'm nerdy enough, if somebody's talking to me and I just say, "Tell me about your company." Well, we're a global Fortune 500 company with 40 million customers, and we sell a variety of products with locations around the globe. Well, what are the nouns? Product, location, customer, right? And so I'm like circling the nouns in my head, right? So, or you can find a sentence, right? So these might be SOPs or procedures in the company. An employee can work for more than one department. Well, the nouns are your boxes, right? Employee, customer, account, department, right? So that's a really good way to start to kind of seed your entities in your model, or your concepts in your conceptual data model, and you will most likely find some inconsistencies, right? You might say, is it an employee and a team member? I heard both of those things. Is that the same thing? Is one just a marketing level, or team members include interns where employees a specific thing, or contractors, team members, but not employees, right? It's a great starting point. Or talk to people, like I said, in the words you keep hearing. Those nouns are probably the boxes on your data model. And then underline the verbs, because data models are sentences when you read them. And I think some of the data modeling tools still do this. We used to do this back in the day. You take your data model and you spit it out into sentences, and that's something the business can read. And these sentences read both ways. So if you underline the verb, department can contain more than one, and then the cardinality is just the indicators, right? A department can contain more than one employee. And here it says the employee can work for, it's missing a verb phrase, only one department. Okay, that might be really obvious, but there's some stuff I might ask right there. Here, there's a zero on the right, right? Can you have a department with no employees in it in the system? Maybe you just have a reference data set with a bunch of departments. You don't have to have an employee in it. One that actually made my life really difficult in one of my previous roles. Here, an employee can only work for one department. Might be the case, but when I used to do consulting for a product company, I would go on a business trip and have to log my expense report, and I might have done a little product management, a little bit of pre-sales, a little bit of post-sales with a customer, and that was billed to different departments. Made my life miserable because the system, the rule was an employee can only work for one department, but I didn't, right? And that's a great thing that the data model for the system was not the same as the data model for the business. So anyway, great way to start. And again, this is the type of maybe even simple presentation you can give to the business, just to say, you can start to read these things like sentences. I often do put verb phrases that makes it really helpful. So the logical data model, it's similar to the conceptual data model in that you're still using business terminology. But here you're adding a little bit more detail. Your attributes, like a customer can have a first name, last name, date of birth, things like that. Sometimes I put attributes on a conceptual data model. Why? Because I don't always keep them there. But you put first name, last name on a customer, and someone says, "Oh no, we sell B2B. It should be DUNS number and tax ID," right? So it can make it really clear what this thing is. And again, you'll see you just get a little bit more detail. And you ask a lot of business related questions. So a few success stories of data models, and maybe that's the most value of this webinar because some of this you can read in a book. I've got a few out there. A lot of folks do. There's plenty of DATAVERSITY webinars on maybe or training sessions on the how-to. But I think often it is getting the right people in the room and getting those right answers. This was a fun one for me. It was the Environment Agency of England, and they did a webinar with DATAVERSITY and myself way back in 2019. And one of the reasons I liked with this, it was just very different. And that we always talk about the business as if it's one big amorphous blob. And I'm guilty of it myself in this webinar. We always talk about customer and product. Well, there's a lot more types of organizations in the planet. It isn't just retail companies selling selling products to customers, right? And so this group, the quote business was scientists, and the client came to us and she said, "I don't know how to date." I mean, when we say the business isn't technical, I mean this lady had a PhD in chemical biological engineering or something I probably can't even pronounce. So they're a bunch of really smart people. They just didn't know data modeling, but they were logical, right? And so they were taking, environmental samples, and one of the things we help them with is what is an environmental sample? Is sampling fish populations. Yes, there's one lady, her job was to count cows in the countryside. That was interesting. Is that the same as, what do you call it? Biological agents in the water and things like that. And they discovered that it was, and they really got into, for us, talk about imposter syndrome, really trying to understand what they did in a biological level and map that to a data model. Super fun. But they kind of realized that some of these collections and samples, the more they could group them together, there was a lot of synergy across the different departments. So that was a real fun one. And I thought that was worth saying, A, because there's a DATAVERSITY webinar on it, and B, it's not your typical customer sells product. And it really did take understanding the business, and the quote business loved it, and the same sort of thing. We work better together, and it just made our business more clear. The next one, and they also did a webinar with us back in 2021 over COVID years. This one was fun. Great client, and Kiewit is one of those companies you probably know but don't know. I mean, they build a lot of the different highways and infrastructure around the globe, particularly in the Americas. And we always in data modeling land or data architecture, we always kind of make that analogy with building a house or building a building, and there's the kind of logical design and the physical design. What was fun about this, we were literally building things, right? So I was working with real art. Sorry for us data people, real architects that were architecting buildings and constructing them, power plants and uh, you know, things I use, nuclear reactors and things that, of course, I did not know much about, but had to learn. And again, when we say, okay, the business isn't going to get this, this business ate it up, for lack of a better word. They look at architecture diagrams all the time. In fact, they thought the technical data models weren't that technical at all. Imagine trying to look at a system architecture diagram for a nuclear power plant, right? So I think in this case, the models and the architecture diagrams very much were the language of the business. We didn't have to do too much. In fact, our conceptual model data models got really almost more like a logical model because they wanted to see more and more detail. And again, when you think of design, build, construct, support, not no one in the organization, all those things need to work together, but nobody saw it all together. That's not the design people did the design and the build people did the build, but having a data view that connected it all together was really helpful. So that might be another good webinar to catch. But on that note, we do steal their analogy. And so when you design a building, I think we all get, I'm going to design a skyscraper. We should kind of understand how the rooms go and how the walls support it so it doesn't fall down, which is very different than the building of it. I think when we're talking about data land, it can be so, it's not tactile. We're not, data isn't something you hold and touch like a building. That's where sometimes I think physical and logical and conceptual can get mixed. And we sometimes show, I don't think it would be that strange that when we showed a homeowner, if we're building a house, all of the detailed wiring diagrams are expected them to go in and look at the wiring in the house and understand it. That wouldn't seem strange, right? We would show them the higher level model on the left of there's rooms and walls, and there's diagrams here. It doesn't take too much to know that this is the door that opens in a certain direction. I might not have known that until someone explained it, but I didn't need a whole architecture lesson to understand that, right? So I think that's kind of similar to our data models. Give people a little bit of, okay, this is what that symbol means, but then talking about the thing, right? I'm talking about this is your living room. Does the door open left or right? Same thing with the data model. This is your business. Does the data work this way or that way? And keep that separate from the swinging the hammer, which is building the database, right? That said, physical data models are super, super important. And when this webinar is on the business value of data modeling, I would argue that the physical data model can have as much, if not more, business value than the businessy ones because it's going to be more efficient. It's what's keeping the engine running. And efficiency is a big part of it. The crazy idea, designing something before you build it. And a lot of this can be automated, with most of the good data modeling tools in the market. You have the picture on the left. I've designed all of the database, the tables and columns and data types and cardinality and rules. And then you quite literally click a button and it generates your DDL on the right, your create table statements. And then if you want to make a change, you can do it visually, which can be really nice because if you do have to have the conversation with the business or anybody else, other engineers, it's sometimes easier to see that on a picture. And so here's an example of the physical data model. The other one was as well. But yeah, that's going to create your physical design on your different platform. It can also be really helpful if, I don't know, I'm used to working in Snowflake and now suddenly I have to work in Oracle. A lot of these tools have platform specific notation that can kind of help you with that initial. And yes, they can be customized or you can use it. I know if you're a data engineer or DBA, you're like, I don't want a system generating my code. It can get you, it's kind of the AI of of coding, right? It can get you 80% the way there, and then you can at least customize it if that's a concern. But I would say if you are talking to the business, and I don't see this as much anymore, but I've seen it. Sometimes you'll hear the business saying, "I'm not doing data modeling," and kind of understand why. I remember back in the day, you'd kind of have this war room where people would print out an enterprise physical or logical model and say, we're just going to sit here for days and talk about the data type for account code. I mean, I love data modeling and I'd want to jump out the window. So you might need to do this. Can you break it into smaller chunks? And back to the earlier point of can tell a story around it. We're going to talk about marketing campaigns and the data to support that. And we're going to have a 1, maybe 2 hour session. We all have ADD nowadays or busy schedules. You're going to get a lot more interest in the why. And then you will have people talking about the data type for account code, right? Because it'll say, oh, well, the system doesn't integrate this for our marketing campaigns or et cetera, et cetera. But you need to put it in context and keep it small. You as a data modeler, data architect, you're awesome because in your brain you have all this together. And not that I've ever made a mistake, but had I made a mistake, it probably is showing this because you love your data model, you get excited, and I'm going to print another t-shirt. Nobody cares about your data model like you do, right? They care about the result of it. So why you get paid the big bucks, right, is because you do have all these connections in your head. Not everybody else needs to know that. Your job is to create these sub-models or these sub-conversations to get the right answer from the right people and then put it together or bring them and say, well, I know marketing, you want the account code to be this, but that's going to make the billing system, maybe account code isn't the best example, but that's going to affect the billing folks. Can we come to agreement and get those folks together? It is a bit of putting it all together. We don't expect everybody to care about all of it. That makes sense. So I already kind of said this part. So you break it into smaller chunks. Again, most of the good data modeling tools have submodels, subdiagrams, whatever, or just do it yourself and put it on a PowerPoint that we're going to talk about, clients and brokers and accounts and salespeople today to help. And I have had I don't have one of the quotes here, but I've actually had salespeople, which are often the hardest people to convince of anything. I love that data model thing because it helped them get more business because the campaigns worked, right? Because we were talking their language. And so the more you can do that and keep it small and keep it focused, you're going to get a lot more buy-in. And more important, get the right answers from the right people. So on the technical side, though, I think, especially when we're talking about business value, I can't stress this enough, is that there's so many options out there now, and there's data catalogs, which are great, and metadata repositories, which are kind of a flavor of data catalog, are the same thing. The beauty of a data model is it's kind of that active inventory of, and I'm a fan of data catalogs, and data models and data catalogs can work really well together. But in a lot of ways, your data model could be a catalog light in that a lot less expensive, but it's active, right? So if you want to have an inventory of all your data systems, right? You're I don't know, small or not even a small company. Someone hired you, you're like the one great data architect, and they want you to now we have all this stuff. Could you help me understand it from Teradata to Oracle to Snowflake to DB2 to COBOL copybooks? Those were old when I started, and I still see them out there. How can you be an expert in all? You will look like a hero, and this is when I used to work for the data modeler vendors, and this almost seemed like magic to folks. You literally point it to the database, and it will reverse engineer your data model for what it is as it is, and that's a great way when now you have to take over a DB2 database, and I've never worked with DB2. It's a really nice way to kind of get a sense of what's in there. And are there nice, clear relationships here, or are you gonna have to create them yourself with things? Then when you make the changes, the other value ongoing is why I call it active inventory. If you put that in a data catalog, you can look at it, and that's nice. You can see the lineage and things like that. Again, huge fans of data catalogs, not mocking them, but the from a data model level, it's active. I can add columns, I can delete columns, I can make changes, and then you can forward. Did I just do that backwards? Forward engineer. Anyway, then the reverse engineer. I did it right. Then you can forward. No, I didn't. Those arrows are wrong. You forward engineer and you actually create the databases, right? So you both can create a database a model from a database, and then you can make changes and actually create databases from the model, right? So this should be really part of your active development lifecycle, and it makes things a whole lot more efficient. And it's not, it's clear and it's documented for everybody. So sometimes it can feel like agile, and agile development is kind of the antithesis of data modeling. And I still get those questions. I'm trying to, the agile team told me we don't have time for this. I'm skeptical of that. I go back to one of my earlier slides. If you don't have time to do it right, you have time to do it again, right? However, you also don't want, we've had data modelers in a negative stereotype of this one back here, that we can't do anything until we get in a completely documented full enterprise data model. the reality is somewhere between those extremes of do nothing or do everything. And so you're kind of doing that agile approach, and either capital A agile in terms of agile methodology, or lowercase a agile meaning let's just do this in iterative chunks. So, I've had good success with it before each sprint. Let's define the entities in the sprint. Or is there any data involved in the sprint? We had one company, we just did a little checklist because we really had trouble um, convincing the agile people. Is there any data updated or changed or added? If yes, come to us. If no, go do your thing, right? And that was enough to kind of just generate these conversations, right? So again, align with what you're trying to do as a business, do the top down, bottom up, iterate, and then don't forget to kind of publish and communicate, making sure everyone sees these things because that is the value, to be able to actually use them. A couple more, I wanted to end off with some actually real world examples, just to show the breadth, because we always talk about customer and product, but there's a lot more, and these were successful. Um, and why I like these examples is I talked about this earlier, that your data model becomes a business conversation. Like I do a lot of data strategies, and what's the beauty of a data strategy? You're actually changing the trajectory of the business through data, and all of these examples were that. So we worked with a financial services company. Um, we did the data model, and a lot of it came back to who's our customer, what's the target products we sell to them, what is a product, and how is a product different than an asset versus and it was all data models, but it really became how are we going to really optimize our company for next year and get the data right to do that. So that one was particularly fun. This one was a really interesting one. We worked with a company that they sold physical products. I don't want to share too much, or you might know who it is, but they, they were also digital versions of that product that startups were competing with, and they were starting to do themselves. And then they had services to support that. And so we had a data model. It was really just a subtype. We were kind of asking because we were just trying to know, is a digital product the same as a physical product? And like, that is brilliant. Hadn't really thought of it that way. And services being a product, interesting. And it became a whole, do we market them the same way? Do we think of services as a product? And we really got senior management involved in this through a simple subtyping question in a data model. We were a little more savvy than that, but really that's what it was. But that was core to what they were trying to do as a company, and all their systems and everything had to work differently based on that answer. This one was a prioritization effort. They're, e-commerce, they were trying to do a big digital transformation. Where do we start? And especially at the conceptual level, we often use that, or even at the logical level, kind of a roadmap for this is all the data we need to think about. And then we often tie that to the roadmap of, okay, we'll start with product and then customer and then whatever, to kind of help understand that. This one I loved. It was university, and we did a student journey map. A lot of it was kind of a prioritization, but really, how do we make our systems more empathetic to students? And a lot of it was process models or student journey maps, and then data kind of overlaid with that. So, kind of a neat example on the people side of things. This was a water utility. I think that was the example before and they were really trying to do a new digital environment, automate, and do a lot of machine learning, but they didn't have any place for their business rules. So we used it for that. This was a construction contracting, and they were really trying to understand data, but more from an efficiency. So their margins were small. They wanted to say, how can I understand the data and make everything more efficient? So that's back to the business value. We already talked about this one, Agile, in terms of what data is affecting this user story. And then this one, I probably beat to death already, but this was a membership services organization. It was a nonprofit, and it was really, what do we even consider a member and a customer, and how's that going to affect our company? So I just thought those were all pretty different types of organizations and different use cases, but it all came back to this is a business conversation related to data, not a data conversation only, if that makes sense. So a few more just to leave off with some more business benefits. This one, I mentioned that a physical data model can be a business value, efficiencies, etc. So many things and I'm seeing it a bit more, I think, lately with the rush to quote false efficiency of getting it done faster without modeling and things like that. This one absolutely will be not named. A very large online retailer, and we were working with them was we were starting to implement governance. So this was pre-governance. A data engineer, I'm still not sure why, shortened the product code in one of the systems from like character 12 to character 10 or something like that. Brought down their website for 3 days, lost millions of dollars, based on a data type change. So a data model, and actually my story there that I've probably told too many times. The head of marketing said, we're going to print data models and we're going to put them on after we explain what that was. And if you make a change, you have to go write it on the picture. And then the data architect was like, you're so dumb. You don't print a data model because when it changes, you're gonna have to reprint it. And she goes, exactly. Next time you make a change, you're gonna think about it. Don't just make a change. I want you to write it with a pen on this wall, and we're all going to agree. Because something as simple as a data type can bring down. Gosh, this one was a day. I've seen this one like 5 times in the past 2 years with different companies. We have duplicate suppliers, so it seems good. Let's just go and take out the duplicates. Well, it's a data modeling problem here, and people are trying to do the right thing. The system didn't allow a supplier to have more than one address, a shipping address, a billing address, or whatever. So people were just creating new suppliers, which is a horrible data quality problem, but it was because the data model was wrong. People weren't trying to put in the wrong information. Something as simple as, can a supplier have more than one address? Caused a problem, right? This one is an absolutely unnamed company that I did work for. And we sent renewal notices to people who didn't own our software yet because let's go to the customer database, which happened to be the marketing customer, which wasn't someone who owned our product. So we look kind of ridiculous. Remember, renewal is coming up. And they're like, we haven't bought yet. So I appreciate your boldness, but we don't own your product. And this one I kind of mentioned before, looking at our data strategy or roadmap, how do you do that without knowing the full scope of your data assets? And so that's where that conceptual model can be really nice. It's kind of a roadmap of these are all the things we need to think of. And I've used these in data governance steering committee meetings, et cetera. It's like, okay, this is probably a good swath of all the data we have. Do we focus on products? Do we focus on students? Do we focus on, and then how do we get there in a stepwise approach, knowing we need to either master or do data quality or governance around all of these? So, if you haven't done that before, it can work really nicely. So, in closing up, especially when you're at the business level, speak the language of the business, and at the technical level, it's also going to help you increase efficiency because it will solve real world problems. And the more you can explain it in that context, you're going to be a lot more successful. If you need help, we do this for a living. Full disclosure, go to our website and happy to help you with data modeling. And as was already probably talked about too much, this is my final webinar with DATAVERSITY in this series. But I'm not going anywhere. So please do follow me on LinkedIn. You can follow my company on LinkedIn or on our webpage. And there will be new and exciting things coming up in 2026. So you stay tuned. And that's a great way to kind of follow what I will be up to. So thanks again, Shannon and Tony. And if we have time for questions, let's try that.
Donna, thank you so much. Oh, and what a great webinar indeed to end the series on. If you have questions for Donna, feel free to put them in the Q&A section. Just diving in here very quickly, Donna, what should be the role of data architects in semantic modeling and more precisely the development of an ontology and taxonomy for the enterprise?
Absolutely should be involved, just very similar to the things I mentioned with kind of the conceptual and logical. I think where with all of these business centric and love semantic models, didn't just talking about it in this phase, you're that translator for understanding the business, helping. Then that's where these ontologies, these data models are really helpful, but you've got the logic of how to organize things. So I think absolutely that's a data architect facilitating, and then the business kind of adding some of that business knowledge. So really great point.
All right, and I'm going to slip in the final question here. For an organization that already has a complete and good enterprise conceptual and logical data models, what is the value in developing an ontology and taxonomy?
I think they can be related, and I think, gosh, that could be a whole other webinar of what folks mean by an ontology and taxonomy. Sometimes that's more for like a graph database or the semantic web and things like that. Sometimes it literally is the values, though, of like a taxonomy can be, you can say a product has a grouping or a hierarchy on the website, right? But the taxonomy can be like the actual values of that, like blue shoes or shoes, and how you do that. So sometimes it's a separate team that should work with you in the data model. But I want to stop there because taxonomy and ontology, probably another great webinar topic of what people mean by that. But I do think it's slightly different than the data model, but you should be involved and they should kind of work together there.
Donna, this has been so good. I'm afraid that's all the time that we have, though, for this webinar. Again, Donna, thank you so much for being such a great partner over the years. It has been a true pleasure. I'm going to miss your rants in these webinars. It's one of my favorite things. Um, But thanks to everybody for joining us in this webinar and for the series. Just a reminder, I will send a follow-up email by end of day Thursday for this webinar with links to the slides, the recording, and of course all of Donna's contact information here, so you can follow her and keep up to date with all things Donna and global data strategies. So thank you all. Hope you have a great day. Donna, a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, y'all.